Hey, if you're in the Houston area, come on, check us out here at Meadows Place. We don't buy it, I promise. And so we're glad you're checking in if you're watching that way. And then hi to everybody in the room. Good morning. Glad you're here this morning. If you've got a Bible, I want to invite you to turn to John chapter 11 as we continue on in our series that we're doing to start the year called That You May Believe. This phrase comes out of the end of John chapter 20, and it's John's reason for writing what he has, so that you and I would come to belief and find life, abundant life in Jesus. Now, here's the thing. I don't know, maybe you caught on to it a little bit, but John is just humming with all kinds of energy and all kinds of like good reasons to stop reading and start talking about what John's doing. And John chapter 11 is one of those chapters that I'm not going to be able to help myself. I'm going to have to stop on a number of occasions and just go, oh my goodness, do you see what's happening here? But because we can't have a 3-hour sermon, I thought I would do something to save me from myself and to save you from myself. And so I'll explain here in a second, but first you need to cheer for a friend of mine. Y'all welcome to the stage, Carson O'Neill. Y'all cheer for Carson O'Neill. We were trying to figure out how long Carson and I have known each other. I think when she was like 3 or 4 years old. I've had the privilege of doing ministry with her family for a number of years. You guys rock. And this morning, Carson is going to do the reading. And then Carson, I'm going to commit to you in front of everybody that I will only interrupt 7 times. Because it's the Gospel of John, and we've been counting to 7. Did you catch that? You're welcome. That'll hit later this afternoon while you're taking a nap, all right? So 7 times, I promise, only 7 times, I will interrupt and talk a little bit about what you've just read. Other than that, you just read. Deal? All right, y'all cheer for Carson again. All right, so this is, again, if you got a Bible, John chapter 11, starting in verse 1, are you ready? Yeah. All right, whenever you're ready. Yeah, you can, oh, you don't need that? Here, I'm sorry about that. Here, let me move. Michael, I told you I'd give it back to you. Here you go. Okay, that's you. All right. John chapter 11.
All right.
Starting, I'll just be sitting over here.
All right, yep. Everyone can hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Now I'm
Okay, that's good. Thanks. That's interruption number 1. You should have seen I was going to do that, right? Okay. All right. So let's remind ourselves where we are in the Gospel of John. Here's a graphic for you that kind of shows you an overlay of the Gospel of John without any of the text. And right in the middle of it is John chapter 11 and 12. So we are right at the center point. And this passage out of John chapter 11 is going to close the first half of the book of John and then set us up for what's to come. If you'll remember, early on in John chapter 1, he's talking to a disciple named Nathanael, and he tells Nathanael that he saw him under a fig tree. And Nathanael is like, whoa, you must be someone special that you would have that vision. That's where I was. And Jesus says to him, you think that was cool. Dude, buckle up, because you're about to be blown away about what you're going to see. That's not the exact translation, but you get the idea, all right? So, and then Jesus makes reference to a story out of the book of Genesis, where angels are going up and down a stairway. We call it Jacob's ladder. Maybe you know that story. There's no ladder in the story, but that's what it's known as. And it's this idea, it's this place where heaven and earth meet. And what the Gospel of John opens with is that in Jesus, heaven and earth are completely overlapped. In this person is God and flesh united as one. And what he says to Nathanael, and then I think what John tells us, the reader, is get ready. Because you're going to see heaven, God's space, move into our space and do incredible things. And what have we been reading? John 2 through 10, miracle stories. Turns water into wine, feeds 5,000, heals a blind man. Heaven invading earth. And this is the section that's coming to a close in John chapter 11. All right, it's back to you. That was 1. 6 more to go. All right. I'll let you go a little bit longer this time, I promise.
Thanks, appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Now a man was sick, Lazarus from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. And it was her brother Lazarus who was sick. So the sister sent a message to him, "Lord, the one you love is sick." When Jesus heard it, he said, "This sickness will not end in death, but is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it." Now Jesus loved Martha, her sister, and Lazarus. So when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days in the place where he was. Then after that, he said to the disciples, "Let's go to Judea again." "Rabbi," the disciples told him, "just now the Jews tried to stone you, and you're going there again? Aren't there 12 hours in a day?" Jesus answered. "If anyone walks during the day, he doesn't stumble, because he sees the light of the Lord. But if anyone walks during the night, he does stumble, because the light is not in him." He said this, and then he told them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm on my way to wake him up." Then the disciples said to him, "Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will get well." Jesus, however, was speaking about his death, but they thought he was speaking about natural sleep. So Jesus then told them plainly, "Lazarus has died. I'm glad for you that I wasn't there, so that you may believe, but let's go to him." Then Thomas said to his fellow disciples, "Let's go too, so that we may die with him."
All right, great. Thank you. All right, so there's a couple things going on here. Now, earlier on in chapter 4, we talked about this idea of glory. I want to remind you of a couple things in the beginning of John when referring to glory. This is John chapter 1, verse 14. "The Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we observed his glory. The glory as the one and only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth." And then John chapter 2, verse 11 is the water to wine story. And it says, Jesus turned the water into wine, the first of his signs in Cana of Galilee. He revealed his glory, and his disciples believed him. His glory is this display of Jesus' reign and rule, that he is the Son of God. He is who he claims to be. And as a result, we can have what he offers. It's his revealing of the glory. And so he says that whatever is about to happen with Lazarus, whatever you and I are about to read and what the disciples were about to see, it is going to be another way in which he reveals his glory. And then did you catch kind of the conversation that's taking place between death and life in this section? It starts with Jesus getting word that his friend whom he loves is sick. A couple days go by, and then he says, "We need to go to Judea." And did you catch what the disciples say to him? "We can't go there. They want to stone you," which is another way of saying they want to kill you. And Jesus says, that's where we need to go. So much so that his disciples are so convinced that it's going to end in his death. Did you catch what Thomas says? "Well, if you're going down, we're going down with you." And they begin to walk towards Bethany. Now, in a chapter earlier that we read last week, Jesus has a couple of I am statements. And one of his statements is, "I am the good shepherd." I don't know if you remember, but the good shepherd has a certain characteristic about them. It's that they lay their life down for their friend. So Jesus has just said, "I'm the good shepherd. I lay my life down for the sheep." The next story is Jesus, your friend's sick, but if you go to where he is, you're going to die. And it's as Jesus has said, this is exactly why I've come. In order for Lazarus to have life, I must go and die. This is, if you're like, man, that sounds a lot like the bigger gospel story, you're exactly right. Jesus knows that his friend's life depends on him losing his life. And he makes his way to the city. Because that's the kind of love Jesus has. Let's keep going.
When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem. Many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them about their brother. As soon as Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him. But Mary remained seated in the house. Then Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been there, been here." Oh my gosh.
It's all right. You got it? Where'd you go? Let's see here. Keep going.
Thank you.
Boom.
Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Yet even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Your brother will rise again, Jesus told her. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me, even if he dies, will live. Everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she told him. I believe you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who comes into the world.
All right, interruption number 3. Okay, so we got this gospel that John's written so that we may believe, and now we've got a story, and do you notice that Martha comes out, and the thing that they talk about is, Martha, what do you believe? Do you believe who I am? Do you believe that I am the resurrection and the life? So one of the things that we've been talking about and we've been following along with, so we need to make right, is we've been looking at all the 7 I am statements in the Gospel of John. So let's make sure that we document this last I am statement, I am the resurrection. If you'll put that graphic up on the screen. Perfect. So we've had I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the gate for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. And now Jesus tells Martha, I am the resurrection and the life. See, Martha's a good Jew, and except for the Sadducees, most Jews believed in a resurrection that would come at the end of time. And so when Jesus says, hey, your brother will live again, Martha's like, yeah, I know he's going to live then, but I was talking about right now. And I love that John tells us that when Jesus shows up, he's full of grace and truth. And if you want to see both grace and truth in action, just watch Jesus' interaction with Martha. She is hurting. She's probably upset. There's this thing about her conversation with Jesus where she's like, I know you could have done something, and I still think I know you can do something still. And Jesus says, no, let me like meet you where you are and then show you the better thing that you're not yet understanding. See, it's not just that there will be a resurrection one day, it's that I am the resurrection. Did you catch those verses again? I am the resurrection and the life. So the one who believes in me, even if they die, will live. And then everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. And again, the Gospel of John presents this opportunity all the time, and I just never want to jump over it. If you're here this morning and you're not sure what you believe about Jesus, then this is the verse for you to focus in on this morning. For you to consider, what do you think about Jesus, and to hear his invitation. The everyone, it includes you. It really does. He knows you better than you know yourself. He loves you more than you could ever comprehend. And the everyone includes you. And so I'd ask you to really consider what Martha has to consider in that moment. Faced with everything that's going around me, now Jesus stands before me and says, I am the resurrection, I am the life, and whoever believes in me, they'll never die. I will defeat death itself. And John writes this. I think John tells us this story so that we may believe. That was 3, right? Okay, 4 more to go. You ready? All right, your turn again.
Having said this, she went back and called her sister Mary, saying in private, the teacher's here and is calling for you. As soon as Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were with her in the house consoling her saw that Mary got up quickly and went out. They followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to cry. As soon as Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and told him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. When Jesus saw her crying, and the Jews who had come with her crying, he was deeply moved in the spirit and troubled. Where have you put him? He asked. Lord, they told him, come and see. Jesus wept. So the Jews said, see how he loved him. But some of them said, couldn't he who opened the blind man's eyes also have kept a man from dying? Then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb.
All right, freeze there. Thank you. You're doing great. You're doing really great. It's not easy standing up here and reading. You're doing awesome. Okay, so a couple of things. First, as some of you are aware, Lisa Chapman and I, we have an ongoing conversation about the NLT translation. It's her favorite translation. It's, according to Lisa, the only translation. I'm pretty sure she's told me it's the translation that Jesus himself used, right? Lisa, you should know that in my studying over the last week or two, the NLT got some serious props for how they tell this story. And I didn't want to admit it, but then I would feel bad. And so I'm just confessing, you win today. You win today, all right? A lot of times these translations, they'll try and like soften Jesus's response. If you notice, it says that Jesus was deeply moved. And the description here is, in some ways, he's angry. To the point where if you were to see Jesus, he would be visibly angry. There's an idea that he's almost shaking. And there's a ton of conversation about what has got Jesus so moved? What has got Jesus so angry? Is it that Jesus is just stepping into the moment, even if you know that death is temporary, even if you know that there's hope beyond the grave? Death is hard. We've all been there. I've been in services of people who have faithfully followed Jesus their entire life, and I'm still mad that we're at the funeral because I'd rather not be at that point. So is Jesus just kind of caught up with his friends and experiencing and revealing his humanity to us? Is Jesus upset at the unbelief? Did you see what's happening? There's a lot of questions about Jesus, and if he would have shown up, he maybe could have done something. His disciples, they're like, well, we're going to go to die, but we'll die with you. There are some who are like, well, if you could heal the blind man, couldn't you have done something about this? And perhaps Jesus is just upset that there still remains unbelief after miracle after miracle after revealing his glory and God's glory to them. Is Jesus simply angry because he knows that the wages of sin is death, that the story of Lazarus is true for all of humanity? We are all caught up in this broken world. We are all caught up in a world where it seems like sometimes evil wins. And so he's just kind of reflecting on the Lazarus story and truly the larger story, because for everyone around them, they'll too someday end up where Lazarus ends up. And it was never supposed to be that way. It is a sign of creation broken. And so he just gets caught up in that. Or is Jesus reflecting on the fact that he knows that when he walked into the city, what Thomas had said was true? He's walking to die, and so he has on his mind the cross. He knows that he's going to speak into existence something and do a radical change in Lazarus' life, but he knows that there's a death still to come, his own on a cross. I think the answer is yes. I think the answer is probably a bit of all of it. He's thinking about where he has to go. He's thinking about the loss of his friend. He's wrestling with the unbelief of some within the crowd. And he's just upset that death has shown up and broken what God declared to be good. I think it's just important for us to know that you kind of combine all of that, and Jesus gets visibly upset. He gets visibly angry. If you've ever felt those kind of emotions around these particular topics, I think it's because you're human, and I think it's a good thing to feel. The good news is that the story doesn't end there, though, and so we'll continue on. Now, brace yourself, because we're at church, and so you guys kind of know what the answer is going to be, but just pretend you've never heard this story before. And you're now caught up in the drama, in the tension. He could have done something if he would have shown up a couple of days earlier, and watch what happens next.
Then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. "Remove the stone," Jesus said. Martha, the dead man's sister, told him, "Lord, there is already a stench because he has been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Didn't I tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they removed the stone. Then Jesus raised his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you heard me. I know that you always hear me, but because of the crowd standing here, I said this, so that they may believe you sent me." After he said this, he shouted with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, bound hand and foot with linen strips, and with his face wrapped in cloth. Jesus said to them, unwrap him and let him go.
All right. Is this interruption number 5? Is it 4 or 5? 5. Okay, good. 5. Okay. Jesus, God in flesh, speaks words, and out of those words come power and life. Woohoo! That was your chance. He says, I am the resurrection. I am the life. The gospel's been saying, I am God in flesh. I have power over death. He says to them, Lazarus is sleeping because in Jesus' hands, even death is but temporary. He's got power over it too. So to Jesus, it's sleeping. And then he gets to the moment and he says, Lazarus, come out. And I'm sure everyone was like, I wouldn't have done it this way. I would have told everyone to go away, try to do a magic trick of some kind. But he just says, Lazarus, come out. And the dude walks out because he's got power over death, because he is who he says he is, because he is the resurrection and the life. He is who he says he is. It's unbelievably amazing. A dead guy came back to life. And if you're reading that story and you're like, man, it was a tomb and there was a stone, he had to roll it away, and there's a lot of conversations about linens and all this other stuff. This sounds like a resurrection to come. Yes. Again, yes, this is pointing to Jesus' ultimate death, burial, and resurrection himself. But Jesus said, he's just sleeping. I'm going to do something about it. He walks into the city. He meets the people where they are. He gets down in the just grime and dirt and brokenness of the situation. He cries with them. He cares for them and says, follow me, let's go. Tells Lazarus to come out, and the dude walks out of the tomb alive. That's incredible. That's so amazing. Okay, now, a couple of things. This is now the 6th miracle recorded in the Gospel of John, so let's document it. We have the water turning into wine. He healed an official's son. He told a lame man to walk. He made a lot of fish and bread. He told a blind man that he can now see. And then he told Lazarus to come out of the grave, and y'all, he did. He did. Now, here's something. We've been counting to 7. Have you noticed this? The I am statements and now the miracle statements. We've been counting to the number 7. And perhaps you've maybe thought, why? Why 7? It seems like this is an important number, but I don't know why. And Doug, you haven't really talked about it. And it hit me like today would be the morning to tell you why we're counting to 7 and why it's such a big deal and why from this point forward, you should be reading the Gospel of John on the edge of your seat, looking for the 7th miracle. And then it hit me, I don't know if I can do it justice because this is awesome. This is like so cool. But I have a friend who can. So I called my friend and I was like, dude, if I gave you 4 minutes to just nerd out on this point in the Gospel of John, would you do it? And he said, I need 40, not 4. I said, well, Andy, I can only give you 4. And he said, all right, I'll do it. So y'all, welcome to the stage, Andy Dunham. Andy, just go, dude. Just go. Let us know. Yes, you have props.
All right, check. All right. Well, I too can exploit children, so I got my little guy up here. He's going to help us with some visual aids. So, Jeffrey, when I say the word 7, what do you do? Give me a guy.
Perfect.
Oh, you're telling me already? Come on now. All right. So buckle up, guys. The Hebrew Bible begins with a verse that has 7 words in it. That begins the creation story, which takes 7 days. God says, let there be 7 times in the creation story. On the 7th day, God completes his work. Therefore, the number 7 stands for completion, stands for rest, because God rests on the 7th day. Also stands for God coming to rest and reign with his people eternally, because the 7th day has no end. Buckle up. Abraham gets called by God through a 7-line poem. God's people go into Egypt, but he rescues them, and after that, they have a 7-day feast. In the wilderness, they eat manna, but they do not collect manna on what? What day? The 7th day. That's right. Moses goes to Sinai. How many times does he go up the mountain? 7 times. One of the 10 commandments says, honor the Sabbath. That commandment has 7 sentences. Yes, that's right. On the 7th trip, Moses gets the plans for the tabernacle. God instructs Moses how many times? 7 times on how to build the tabernacle. Moses obeys God 7 times. The tabernacle contains the menorah. How many branches does the menorah have? 7. That's right. There are 7 feasts in the Jewish calendars. 3 of those feasts happen in the 7th month. 2 of those involve resting for 7 days. The day of Pentecost is one of those feasts. That is a super Sabbath. So after Passover, we have 7 Sabbaths. That's 49. You add 1 to that. That's the 50th day after Passover. That's Pentecost. Keep that in mind. Every 7 years, we have a Sabbath year. That means the land rests, we release from debts, we release our slaves. After 7 Sabbath years, we have the 50th year, which is the year of what? Jubilee. That is the year when we return to our land, and that is the super Sabbath year. The prophets also use the number 7 to predict when Israel would return from exile. So Jeremiah says 70 years, we're going to come back from exile. Daniel says, no, it's 70 times 7 years, 490 years. Keep that in mind. Jesus, when he comes to read the Isaiah scroll in the temple, in the synagogue, he says, I am here to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. That's the year of Jubilee. Jesus is always doing things on what day? The Sabbath day, the seventh day. Thank you. How many times does he say to forgive? 7 times? No, 70 times 7. He sends out how many people in Luke? 70 guys. Acts, when does the Spirit come? Day of Pentecost. All right, now, here's the home stretch. The book of Revelation, you guys, this guy just goes totally nuts. How many 7s do we have in the book of Revelation? So many. There are 7 letters to 7 churches. The 7 churches have 7 spirits and 7 lampstands. There are 7 stars. There are 7 seals on the scroll that the Lamb has to read. The Lamb has 7 horns and 7 eyes. There are 7 angels with 7 trumpets. Before the 7th seal is opened, there are 7 thunders. And then the beast of the sea comes out with 7 heads. The Lady of Babylon is on a city of 7 hills, and then the final judgment, the bowl of wrath, 7 bowls of wrath, bringing 7 plagues. All right, what does all that have to do? The book of Revelation, all of this comes together. God finally comes to reign and rule for his eternal Sabbath, right? The New Jerusalem comes down out of heaven. God's plans from the beginning, are finally fulfilled. God wipes away every tear from their eyes. He's there with the tree of life with his people. He rules over the nations. The tree of life is for the healing of the nations, and I'm out.
So I'll go back and listen to the podcast. I listen on 2 times speed just to try and remember what I say. And I cannot wait to listen to that on 2 times speed, because that'll be... So the number 7, it's kind of a big deal. It's completion. It's where it's going. And so now you and I, we've seen 6 miracles, and now we're looking for number 7. It's not this morning, so we'll just keep reading. Are you ready? If you're new here this morning, it's like this every week. Yes, yeah, that's great.
Therefore, many of the Jews who came to Mary and saw what he did believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. So the chief priests and the Pharisees convened the Sanhedrin and were saying, "What are we going to do, since this man is doing many signs? If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nations." One of them, Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, said to them, You know nothing at all. You're not considering that it is our advantage that one man should die for the whole nation, and not for the nation, but also to unite the scattered children of God. So from that day on, they plotted to kill him. Jesus therefore no longer walked openly among the Jews, but departed from there to the countryside near the wilderness.
Perfect. All right, you're doing great. All right, interruption 6 of 7, so we're almost there. If you'll remember that the good shepherd was the one who lays down his life for the sheep. And then he compares it to the hired worker, Jesus does, the hired worker who looks out for his own interest. Here you have the Jewish religious establishment starting to see and hear that Jesus is making a serious difference. And this isn't good for their power and authority that they have granted to them by the Roman government. If a word comes up of a new king named Jesus, Rome's going to have something to say about that. And so this is them acting out the hired worker role. They're looking out for their own interests, and they decide they got to wipe them out. And then Caiaphas says, well, wouldn't it be better if we just kind of gave them a sacrificial lamb? What if we pointed them to Jesus and we just got rid of the leader, the supposed king? Wouldn't that be better for everybody? And then the part that was highlighted in blue, let's read it again, verse 51. This is John, saying, hey, the things that are happening in this story are not on accident. God is up to something in this world. And so here are Jewish leaders looking out for their own interests, but let me let you in on what's really happening. Caiaphas did not say this on his own, but being the high priest that year, he actually prophesied that Jesus was going to die for the nation. And if you remember, there was a lot of sheep from all different kinds of sheep brought into the pasture. And Jesus wasn't going to just die for the nation only, but also to unite the scattered children of God. In the Gospel of John, Jesus is always walking step in step with the Father and is always reminding us that he's not having his life taken from him, rather he gladly gives it in obedience to what he's been called to. And so here, even the hired workers are looking out for their own interests, and John goes, but this is all according to plan because God's in control. God's got this, and Jesus is up to something. So they're actually doing exactly what they need to do in order for this story to go where it's got to go. One last section of reading.
Now the Jews' Passover was near, and many went up to Jerusalem from the country to purify themselves before the Passover. They were looking for Jesus and asking one another as they stood in the temple, "What do you think? He won't come to the festival, will he?" The chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that if anyone knew where he was, he should report it so that they could arrest him. 6 days before the Passover, Jews came to Bethany where Lazarus was, the one Jesus had raised from the dead. So they gave a dinner for him there. Martha was serving them, and Lazarus was one of those reclining at the table. Then Mary took a pound of perfume, pure and expensive nard, anointed Jesus' feet, and wiped his feet with her hair. So the house was filled with fragrance of perfume. Then one of his disciples, Judas, said, "Why wasn't this perfume sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor?" He didn't say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. He was in charge of the money bag and would steal part of what was put in it. Jesus answered, "Leave her alone. She has kept it for the day of my burial. For you always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me." Then a large crowd of Jews learned he was there. They came not only because of Jesus, but also to see Lazarus, the one he had raised from the dead. But the chief priests had decided to kill Lazarus, also because he was the reason many of the Jews were deserting them and believing in Jesus.
Hey, would you all cheer and thank Carson O'Neill for reading for us this morning? Thank you. You rock, friend. And hey, if you're serving communion this morning, I want to invite you to make your way to one of the tables that you're serving at, as this is where John chapter 12 points us to. If you notice, John uses the word anointed, that Jesus was anointed with oil. And in the Bible, a common kind of character that gets anointed with oil is a king. That's what kings happen to them. They get anointed. And Jesus very quickly ties the anointing of him to his death. That is actually in his crucifixion, as he's nailed to the cross, as he's raised up, we see King Jesus becoming enthroned and doing what he was been called to do, and creating for you and I the opportunity to find life in him. That's why we celebrate communion together every Sunday morning. And I just am so grateful that John just points us right there. John says, remember, it's an upside down kingdom where it's actually Christ crucified that is our point of victory over the thing that plagues Lazarus and plagues you and me.